Global strategy is no longer dictated by a single superpower, but by the friction of a dual-axis rivalry emerging in Asia. This graph tracks the GDP of the US, China, and India to 2040. Adding working-age population data, trajectories pull apart. Demographic energy shifts. The gap between China and India represents a competition for economic leadership and global influence, defining the next 20 years. For anyone deploying capital or setting long-term policy, the challenge is identifying which of these two models will scale most sustainably and how to position for that outcome. Right now, you are facing a critical strategic choice. Do you anchor your 15-year plans to China's proven, highly centralized industrial machine, or do you pivot toward India's accelerating demographic engine? China's growth model relies on hardware, centralized control, and massive physical scale, built on decades of rapid urbanization and infrastructure development. India operates on a different architecture. They are driving a services-based economy powered by information technology, digital ecosystems, and the youngest workforce in the world. Their model relies on software and human capital. We are analyzing these two divergent operating architectures to determine where global capital, trade, and talent are likely to flow over the next 2 decades. To make that decision, we must measure China's mature efficiency against India's demographic momentum and identify the structural vulnerabilities hidden inside both models. We map these trade-offs using a matrix. China's centralized scale model is on the left, India's distributed velocity model on the right. First, the economic engines. China's input is highly centralized, with decades of state investment directed into advanced infrastructure and export-driven manufacturing. This translates into mature, deeply integrated global supply chains. When you need physical volume manufactured reliably, the Chinese system delivers. But that system is under pressure. China faces rising domestic debt and an aging workforce. Fewer young workers creates a significant drag on future productivity. India's inputs look different. They rely on a services-driven economy, fueled by an expanding young middle class. This generates demographic velocity. Over the next 2 decades, this youth bulge will drive a massive increase in domestic consumption and internal market expansion. The trade-off here is execution. India faces significant physical infrastructure gaps and the bureaucratic challenge of translating a massive population into efficient productivity. China offers the safety of mature infrastructure with the risk of structural decline. India offers explosive top-line growth with a high requirement for execution risk. This brings us to the sector that will decide the balance of power in 2040, technology. China is pouring state capital into artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and semiconductor independence. The goal is absolute control over the full stack of physical technological infrastructure, from the silicon chip to the final hardware application. However, this push for autonomy creates friction. Geopolitical resistance and export controls are increasingly isolating China from global collaborative tech ecosystems. India approaches technology differently. They are focused on building digital public infrastructure, AI applications, and scalable software platforms. They are positioning themselves as the global hub for human-centric technology services and digital platform dominance. The strategic weakness here is a persistent reliance on foreign powers. Without domestic semiconductor and advanced hardware manufacturing at scale, India's digital layer remains vulnerable to external supply shocks. Capital allocators must weigh these two environments. You can invest in a highly capable but increasingly isolated hardware fortress, or an interconnected software ecosystem that remains hardware-dependent. Finally, we have to look at how these nations project their internal power outward. This map displays China's method of expanding global reach. They project power through hard physical networks, deploying trillions in infrastructure loans and connectivity projects. The cost of building these physical dependencies is geopolitical blowback. Debt pressure and restrictive trade practices have generated significant regional resistance. India expands its influence through human networks. They rely on cultural soft power and a massive diaspora embedded in international institutions. While this builds international goodwill, soft power is difficult to weaponize. It takes longer to translate into hard strategic leverage during a geopolitical crisis compared to physical control. China builds rigid physical dependencies, while India builds fluid institutional alignments. Navigating these two environments requires distinct risk management strategies tailored to each nation's specific reach. There will not be a single winner in 2040. Instead, the global system will likely move along three possible tracks. We can map these scenarios by plotting time horizon against global impact. In the first scenario, both nations emerge as parallel superpowers. China dominates global manufacturing, while India leads in services, software, and demographic expansion. In the second scenario, China maintains its clear lead. India continues to grow, but fails to close the structural gaps in its internal infrastructure. In the third scenario, India overcomes its physical bottlenecks and translates its young population into sustained technological and economic leadership. Because all three outcomes require interaction with both markets, your objective is to align your specific operational needs with the correct national architecture. Let's translate this macroeconomic data into a practical allocation strategy. If your priority is immediate supply chain efficiency, advanced manufacturing, and tight hardware integration, the China model is the logical anchor. Its centralized scale is unmatched, provided your business can absorb the drag of demographic stagnation. But if your priority is long-term consumer market expansion, software integration, and digital services, you must pivot toward India. You can harness their demographic velocity, assuming you have the operational patience to navigate their bureaucratic friction. The global market will spend the next 20 years adapting to these two rival systems. Your job is not to predict which country is better. Success in 2040 comes down to choosing the exact model, centralized hardware or distributed software, that best hedges against your own long-term vulnerabilities.